Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Talking Prog. Me and that was a disaster, but we are your hosts, Zoltan, Ryan, Thiago, and my father. And today we have our guest, Josh. Why not you tell yourself? Tell us a bit about yourself, Josh.
My name is Josh. I'm from America, from Massachusetts. I'm a guitarist in the band Flow Within the Chaos, along with Thiago. We play prog metal. We're writing an album right now called Death of Arthur. It's a medieval progressive metal album.
Nice.
And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Great. That's great. Dad.
Oh, sure. I'm Bryan, and I played keyboards in the progressive rock band Benjamin's Kite from 1983 to 1993. And in 1991, we released this album, The Kite, and we had a top 20 AOR hit in Canada. And we were released in Germany and Holland. And in 1993, we broke up due to musical differences. We wanted to be very much more of a traditional progressive rock band, and the record company didn't care for that too much. So I didn't play for almost 24 years until Zoltan was 15, which is 3 years ago. And, he was starting to play the drums and he wanted to do something. So we decided we'd get some of those old demos and maybe write a little bit new and put together an album. And in 2018, we released this one, Benjamin's Kite, Antediluvian Euphonies. And it's a bit of a throwback to 70s and 80s type prog, but with modern recording sound. So it's pretty cool. And that's it.
Ryan.
Great album.
Yeah, it was a great album.
Definitely.
My name is Ryan. I play lead guitar and I do lead vocals in a band called the Moss Troopers. We're writing our debut album, which will be coming out hopefully by the end of the year. Of course, Corona slowed that down a little bit, but yeah, that's about it. I play guitar on Instagram too. That's kind of it.
Thiago.
All right, sir. My name is Thiago. Like Josh, I'm from Massachusetts in the U.S. And if I a guitarist as well, co-guitarist, so a co-writer with him. We both compose, we both write, we both come up with our stuff. And if I had to add anything else when it comes to albums, the main project right now is The Death of Arthur. And then we maybe later in the future pick up from an album we started writing from 2008. All the way back.
Long time ago.
It was Systematic Failure, right, Josh? Or something like that. That was the name we
Access
decided.
denied.
Access Denied. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And it was more like, exactly. It was more like, very raw type of like prog, which were very into like Dream Theater, Between the Buried and Me, Human Abstract. Which hasn't changed, but it was going to be a straight up like prog metal album, with some jazz fusion songs like our song Numeria. It's very melancholic, sad jazz fusion with some leads on it. Fantastic. But yeah, other than that, I'm on Instagram. We both on Instagram, and also we have projects with you guys, which we'll probably talk about none of that.
Of course. Considering we did talk about that in a previous episode, do cite episode 1 to check out that section. And we are your hosts. Let's get to Talking Prog. Anyways, so the first subject is guitarists and their influence on prog. Our second subject will be 3 hidden gem albums. And the third main subject will be old progressive rock music and its influence on the newer progressive new progressive stance as of now. We will be talking a little bit about Chris Squire as it is his 5th anniversary of his passing, and we will see where everything goes from there. So, Josh, for guitarists and their influence on prog, why not you start us off?
I mean, that's a pretty interesting topic because it's like, for me, guitarist influence in any band in general is so drastic. It's like, prog especially, they kind of the tone setters, Right. You look at guys like Petrucci. Obviously, I'm a huge Dream Theater fan. guys like AJ Minette who incorporated classical styles into prog, like classical Spanish styles. Guys like Paul Wagner who incorporated death metal with prog. And so on and so forth. Their influence has been huge. And you can even go back to the shredders from the 80s and 90s, like Yngwie and those guys, because, they weren't straight up 100% prog, but they definitely helped influence the genre with the techniques and styles and stuff they were using, the different sounds, etc.
Totally agree. Yeah, I can see that. Thiago?
Yes. Okay. Well, if I have, since Josh talking about like more like modern and some old, I guess I'll go like, for example, if I had to say, start naming. Alex Lifeson from Rush. I think one of the ways he influenced a lot of, progressive rock and metal in general.
Yeah,
is the whole idea of utilizing more open chords and modes instead of just like simple chords and bar chords and simple chord progressions.
Of course.
Where you would utilize like a mode in a note and explore that one note, And then you have Steve Hackett, which like Josh, what he said, AJ Minette, used the more classical, and the Spanish stuff into prog. And from that point on, I guess I could also throw in, if anybody else I could throw in, is probably like, let me think. I'd say, I wouldn't say necessarily Robert Fripp, but I'd say he influenced the way how guitars can be quirky, can be
an experimental sound, of course.
Experimental, atonal. Steve Hackett did that too. Kind of like open up, which also Alan Holdsworth. Alan Holdsworth's got to be one of the biggest influences in prog, to be honest with you. Outside prog, but even though he plays prog.
Yeah.
Go ahead, guys.
Well, I think in terms of Robert Fripp, when you look at his stuff like in the Discipline era, was very guitar heavy. People even say that it influenced like the math rock sound.
Of course.
Right. In that sense, with the dual guitar stuff and the polyrhythms and that kind of thing. And his lead playing too, not as influential as other guitar players, but I do think somebody like Steven Wilson echoes Robert Fripp's guitar sound.
Yes.
Definitely, yeah. Dad?
So, again, coming from a different generation and, most of the metal guitar players that you guys know and stuff, I've never heard most of it. I would say that, most of the guitar that I really love the most is from the 70s. And I picked as my favorite 3 prog guitar players would be Alex Lifeson, Andy Latimer, and Steve Hackett, of course. Steve Hackett.
Yeah.
Right.
And when we were discussing this topic with Zoltan, I was thinking back to, 1982, 1983, when we were forming this progressive rock band, and Zoltan and I are in just outside of Toronto in Canada, and we're kind of in a smaller town, and you could put up ads to get guitarists for years on end. You basically get nobody to show up, or one guy shows up and really can't play any of it. And so for the first 5 years, to the best of my recollection, the Benjamin's Kite didn't have a guitar player. Wow. And in some of the demos, you'll hear that there's a little bit of guitar, but that's like some guy that we knew who really wasn't in the band, and he was pretty good, and he'd come in and he'd do the little session part, and then he'd go back to whatever he was doing before. And we thought, well, we're going to get a guitarist. We're going to find one. And then by the time we had done, I guess, 5 years, and we did this album. Before we released the Kite album, we did a full, complete professional album with a different singer, and then he quit, so we couldn't release it. And on that album, by then, I'd been playing 5-6 years, and I was getting very confident. And at that time, listening, there's lots of Emerson, Lake and Palmer and UK, and there wasn't that much guitar. So we were kind of like getting to the point of, well, we're just going to be like Emerson, Lake and Palmer. We're not going to really have very much guitar. We just won't have a guitar player. Yeah. And so we did a full album. We had no guitar player. And, for me, being a keyboard player and being that I'm, I play a lot and I'm very greedy with all the parts, it's kind of fun. And then, because the singer quit at that time, we were looking for a singer. And then we got Robbie Brennan as our singer. And he was the singer for the last 5 years, and he was the singer on both of these albums. And it just so happened that he played guitar. So, that kind of solved that problem. We don't need to really go look for a guitarist. And because he's the singer, he'll be okay where I'm really filling in lots of space. And, he might not play as much. And I don't know if you guys noticed on Antediluvian Euphonies, there's 2 songs that have no guitar at all.
Yeah, I heard it.
On My Way and the title track. So that's more than 10 minutes. There's no guitar at all. And then some of the other songs, guitar is pretty prominent, Concrete and Steel. But then another song is kind of here and there where you hear some guitar parts and, again, though, the style of like Steve Hackett and stuff and Andy Latimer, it's much different than the guitar players that you guys are listening to. It's a lot more acoustic guitar. Lead lines that are complementary without really being all that flashy, and then a lot of tapping. I really love that tapping stuff.
Oh, I love to. It's very similar to keyboard.
I was thinking about when Robbie joined the band. We were focusing so much on his singing. The guitar just came along, and I don't remember if I even had a conversation with him ever in 5 years about what his guitar influences are. And we were in the studio in 1990, so he'd been in the band for 1 year, and we had written this whole album.
Right.
And as I told you guys the last time, Terry Brown was the producer, and he was so famous for 6 or 7, 8 Rush albums. And it was kind of funny because every time Robbie was warming up, all of a sudden he was pulling out. He seemed to know every Rush song there was. It was very entertaining because Terry Brown was, oh yeah, I produced that, So it was kind of fun. But that was the first time I realized that this guy, he knew every Rush lick in the book.
Yeah.
And I remember that he also liked that guy in Saga.
Christian.
The guitarist in Saga?
Christian, or Christian, or whatever his name is. And then the other guy, and I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this band, Max Webster.
Oh, maybe actually.
Heard a bit.
Yeah, they warmed up for Rush a lot on many tours in the late 70s. So they were, they were like their junior Rush kind of. And
I bet you my father would know them for sure.
Yeah, and Kim Mitchell,
Rush Paul would know.
The lead singer if you guys should check him out, he's a really, really good guitarist. And Robbie was kind of I remember hearing some of his parts, and you could tell it was a Kim Mitchell influence. And, I'll mention that, we were doing this song for the new album that's coming out in a few months, a ballad called Spoken True. And there was a very prominent sounding guitar solo that sounded a lot like Kim Mitchell and maybe a little bit like Trevor Rabin, because he had a Trevor Rabin too, right? And and then he told me in the recording session, he goes, I'm destroying that solo. I was, oh, okay. He goes, well, what are you gonna do? He goes, it's not my thing anymore. So so we were asking him, so like, what do you listen to now? And he's like, oh, I'm really big on this guy from the Doobie Brothers. What is his name? Skunk Baxter. I don't know if you ever heard that guy. On the old Doobie 1970s.
I love Doobie Brothers, but I've never heard of the guitarist. No.
So I would think that that's a little bit more rhythm and blues and folk influenced.
Much more folk and blues, absolutely.
Yeah, folk and blues. I would say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the last thing I was going to say about it is just that, if you're playing the kind of style that Steve Hackett's playing or Andy Latimer, there's a lot of room for a keyboard player. But, I think with a lot of bands you guys like, the guitar it's more prominent and it's thicker.
Yes.
And
100%.
If you were a busy keyboard player like me, you might be like, oh boy, I'm going to be stuck in the background here. I'm never going to get to play.
Yeah, I was about to talk about that.
Well, I think this is where, once again, I need to throw that out there. Dream Theater is a perfect balance because I think it's half and half, really. Even though a lot of people think that Petrucci's famous, but
Rudess is just as talented.
Nobody can think of Dream Theater's guitars without the keyboards because
no way.
There's no guitar instrumental without a keyboard instrumental.
Every solo, Rudess is matching him.
Yeah, they do back and forths. I love that stuff.
Yeah, it's
and
amazing.
That's kind of how it is in my band because it's a busy guitar player and a busy keyboard player. There's the John Petrucci clone and the Rudess clone in my band. So it's just we just go back and forth and we just.
We're looking for a keyboardist, by the way.
Yeah, no. Nick is a freak on the keyboard, but we go back and forth. We try and go faster than each other.
All right. So,
but my band, it's definitely a guitar band because I write a lot of the music, so I can't really think of keyboard parts. So a lot of the band is very riff based since I'm the main writer.
Yeah, of course. If I may, go ahead and bring my own thoughts into this. There was one that I'm surprised that Ryan hasn't even brought up yet. Al Di Meola of Return to Forever. I mean,
I was going to talk about Al Di Meola. Yeah.
His guitar parts are very very technical, but they aren't so unbelievably overly technical that they are much advanced from the 1970s jazz fusion sound.
Cool.
Chick Corea, of course, is he's a very good keyboard player as well. And, when it came down to jazz fusion, the jazz fusion side of prog, I mean, you had guitarists like Al Di Meola, and you had guitarists like Alan Holdsworth and Pat Metheny and all these other ones, and all these other guitar players who were just as prominent. And I would even say that in some cases that Pat Metheny did waver between just regular jazz and even prog-influenced jazz fusion, even though he doesn't want to be labeled as progressive rock or progressive in any way. But I would say that, there are a lot of moments where he is definitely in that jazz fusion sense. But I think that the ones that Dad brought up were very, very, very influential. Andy Latimer, of course, Steve Hackett, and Alex Lifeson. Those are the most prominent voices in retro prog. And of course, as of now, you have guitarists like John Petrucci, and you have you have a lot of guitarists that
have a lot of people right now.
We have a lot. They've developed a lot since the 70s. I mean, you can't have Steve Howe playing in Dream Theater because holy crap.
No.
You can't have Steve Howe. I mean, he'll mess up. He'll mess up. He won't know what he's doing, and of course he'll be off
his own parts.
He'll be off tempo a lot. He'll get off time a lot. And I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, guitarists have so evolved since the
big time.
since the 80s and the 70s that, I mean, they want to be up front. They want to make sure that everyone knows that these guys can actually play really well.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I can respect with Dream Theater. These guys John Petrucci can do pretty much anything on the guitar.
Yeah.
And I mean,
he's a beast. Yeah.
He's definitely
he's no
Holdsworth. He's no Holdsworth, but I mean, he's definitely a really technical guitar player.
Well,
he is. The man's got feel. He's got soul. He writes some beautiful stuff.
He
can
beautiful
write melodies like Steve Rothery.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Steve Rothery. Yeah.
He took that.
Oh yeah, that's true.
The one thing about Petrucci that I like is that definitely when you think about the older bands like Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, there wouldn't have been a guitar player that could keep up with Keith Emerson.
Oh, of course.
If you really think about it. So that's why they didn't have a guitar player, because they couldn't have had someone doing like unisons with Keith Emerson. But say they did that kind of a band in the 1990s. Yeah, he was too talented. And they did have bands like that in the 1990s, like, Liquid Tension Experiment and Dream Theater. The guitar player could definitely keep up with the keyboard player, for example, because of all that advancement that happened.
Oh, of course. And of course, I think that you all are missing one other. There's another band that it's like metal ELP. It's the Parlin Project. That stuff is, everyone is very technical in that band. The guitar player can really play, and Parlin himself, holy crap, that man is basically a new age Keith Emerson. But I think the ones who could probably keep up with Keith Emerson were probably the ones that we mentioned before. Richie Blackmore, you had Steve Hackett, and of course Alan Holdsworth. Those ones could keep up with Keith Emerson. Probably.
And Al too.
Yeah.
Actually, there is one guy I forgot to mention, and it's somebody that I actually just recently started getting into. It's Tosin Abasi. You're talking about a guy who is revolutionizing how you play guitar nowadays.
Oh,
the man is unbelievable.
He's a technical beast. The only problem, I have a lot of respect for Tosin Abasi, especially because holy crap, that man can utilize so much.
And he's coming up with all these new techniques. It's insane.
He's literally slapping an H string. He's slapping an H string. He's basically plucking H strings. He is based. I would imagine that when it comes down to guitar techniques, people are going to want to go in that direction and bring in that
He's
kind
the
of
future,
technique.
100%.
It is the future.
He is the future of guitar players in prog. And I think that overall, I mean, right now we are in the age of guitars in prog. However, I feel like there will be, I feel like maybe about 10 years from now, that age will slowly descend. However, it'll bring up a new age. Because, I mean, you have bands like Caligula's Hearse who don't have a keyboard player, unfortunately.
Yeah.
No, sorry, on Rise Radiant they did have a keyboard player. My bad.
But it was more ambient, so it wasn't like forefront,
more,
like Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
No,
yes,
definitely
kind of
not.
stuff.
But I'm gonna say that I think that because you had the age of keyboards in the 70s and 80s, and then you had the age of guitars rising as of now, and it's slowly declining even as of now because you have bands that are starting to realize
reaching the
that
physical limitations.
we need to
There's
figure
really
out
only so much you can do.
Yeah, we need a new mix. So I have a feeling that the next generation will, and the one that will continue the genre forward, and it probably won't go back. It probably won't change any further than that. It'll just keep on progressing from there, and people will get better and better. I feel like the next step is to just be because you had keyboards and then you had guitars as of now, and I think it'll return back to kind of a form, but it'll be more of an equal thing. It'll be guitars and keyboards. That's the next one.
Mm-hmm. More unison.
Well, I think that'd be the perfect form for progressive music, in my opinion. Because like that's in the 70s and the 80s, the keys, the mellotron, that was more important for the progressive sound because it's such a how can I say eclectic instrument. So many keys. While when you look at a guitar, people think, well, it's 6 strings and 24 frets maximum, for each string. And with the keys, there's so much you can do with it. So many sounds you can make, so many effects, so many different qualities and moods you can summon from it. While the guitar, while you can summon a mood, it was more limited back then in terms of effects, in terms of technology. So either you go acoustic or clean guitars or some chorus delay and distortion. Other than the notes you're playing, that's all you had. Nowadays we have. I just got an octave pedal, a synth pedal. You get so much stuff. So I think it's gonna be
VSTs too. Everything.
Right, exactly. So I think
technology
it's going to be a balance. Well, of course, the guitar I don't think it can do as much as a key, or the key player, but would be around.
The different octave levels is just too crazy that you can play on a keyboard compared to a guitar.
And another thing that I like is how jazz fusion is once again creeping in the progressive genre and on drums here to stay.
Definitely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
Well, let me mention a couple more guitar players. For me, two of my biggest influences are Guthrie Govan and Frank Zappa.
Oh,
and you brought up the jazz fusion. Those guys can improvise for hours. I think Frank Zappa, they can improvise for an hour and not repeat themselves.
Yeah,
I swear to God. Frank Zappa would do these 20-minute solos. He wouldn't repeat himself.
There's only one guy I've seen match Guthrie, and that's Kiko. I've seen them both like the live performance in improvisation. I was like, bruh, that's like
Kiko's amazing.
That's a kindred spirit right there. That's Guthrie Govan's kindred spirit right there. Like, dude,
I'm not sure who Guthrie Govan.
Yeah,
Guthrie Govan is that guy that showed you a song called Waves. I don't know if you remember.
I don't remember.
British
He
guy
played on Stephen Wilson's albums too.
He's on a lot of Stephen Wilson stuff. Yeah,
he's on the Raven and
a little bit of Hand Cannot Erase, a little bit, not too much.
He did a lot of great solos on there, like Ancestral and Regret. Very inspiring to me. I've been listening
and of
to them a
course,
lot.
Stephen Wilson had a lot of really good ones too. Stephen Wilson himself,
and even the Aristocrats.
Oh yeah,
the Aristocrats. He's doing that with Marco Miniman and Brian Beller. Great project.
Do yourself a favor later, Josh. YouTube John Petrucci Guitar World 2 and put Guthrie Govan because he's over there improvising John Petrucci and Kiko.
He kicks John Petrucci's ass.
All right.
Wow.
Oh yeah, he does.
He did better than John Petrucci.
Dad, you had Dad, you did have something to say, correct?
Well, I was going to say that when you guys brought up Steve Wilson, it seems to me, and I like a lot of the stuff, particularly those the Raven and stuff like that. But it seems to me that Stephen Wilson is one of those guys who's got some of the more modern guitar sounds. Plus, he's got a lot of the sort of old Pink Floyd type guitar sounds. So he's got a pretty good mix of all those styles. And so there's a lot that when he does a lot of acoustic guitar playing and he's good. And I love it. And then so when he does the other stuff, he's putting it in there, but it's not like on every song all the time. So it's
more digestible.
Yeah, and you know, and again, it's impossible not to mention that, at least for me, in terms of more modern bands, but you know, Roy and Stolt and I forget the other guy's name in the Flower Kings. You would know. You had the guitar players' name. I mean, those guys are. I love both of those guys, and they're two guys who've managed. I mean, two guitar players, and still over a period of whatever it is, 15, 20 years, whatever, that Thomas Bodine was there, and Thomas Bodine is like, he's playing crazy. I mean, he's probably my favorite keyboard player of the last 20 years. He's crazy good. Love his style. And and again, managed to have lots of guitars and still be able to have all those old sounding, crazy Keith Emerson type keyboards. And it's just absolutely amazing.
That's what I thought. That's what I was thinking when it came down to Stardust We Are. I mean, In the Eyes of the World had there was actually a lot of Keith Emerson noodling by Thomas Bodine on that song for sure. And that was obviously very prominent. I mean, seriously. And I think that when it comes down to it, Huss Freuberg, as much as I have respect for the guy and the guy can sing, I think that his guitar playing, he plays very strange. He plays a left-handed guitar with, no, he plays righty with his left hand. And it's very strange. He's basically the Prog Jimi Hendrix.
What the hell?
But, you know, I mean, Roy Stoll overall, I mean, when you hear the solos that he does on The Sum of No Evil, which is probably that's a 10 out of 10 record for me. And if any of you guys haven't listened to that record already, you guys should definitely listen to it.
I did.
That's a fantastic record. And I think, Thiago, because you're you've listened to that album probably as much as I have. Yeah. Roy Stoll really doesn't do many blues guitar solos at all, if any at all.
Not in that one.
He does a lot of Alan Holdsworth and jazz fusion guitar solos. It's mainly jazz fusion.
Well, he evolved. I think Roy, the thing that happened to Roy is this. Over the years, which album, you could see him kind of steering away from that bluesy stuff. Sometimes he'd go back.
Oh, yeah, like albums with the Rainmaker and Adam and Eve. Like,
yeah, he had to catch up to Bodine, you know what I mean? Like, the guy is a monster, the key.
I mean, the guy...
No, I gotta catch up to this guy.
The guy grew up with the Sweet. He grew up with Cream, and he grew up with all those guys. He grew up with blues. Oh, yeah. He grew up with Jimi Hendrix and Cream. And then after, I think he said that when he was in high school, he was finally introduced to Genesis and Yes and ELP and these kind of guys. And then he was like, I want to do that. That's when he joined Cape. When he joined Cape-A. Then history repeated itself. He brought back symphonic prog, but he also added so much different elements to it. So albums like Unfold the Future, which is pretty much their most jazz fusion record, along with The Sum of No Evil. You do have these other albums that are more blues influenced, like the Rainmaker and Adam and Eve, but for the most part, they don't really dabble into much blues rock. Not very much at all, actually.
Yeah. Did he also play for Spock's Beard in the Transatlantic?
Just Transatlantic.
He did Transatlantic,
Not Spock's Beard.
Just Transatlantic, right? Okay.
Yeah. I often forget that Roy is as old as he is. Because he was in a 90s band, but he's an old guy.
He was in a band in 1978. He was in a band in 1978. Yeah. He was in one of the original symphonic prog bands. Another one that I'm going to go ahead and say.
He doesn't do bad singing.
No, he's
a good singer.
He's not a bad singer by any means.
Yeah.
Some of us still play, you know.
Oh, yeah. One more that I am going to mention before we have to transition to the next. I'm going to go ahead and bring out one more. Alan Morse of Spock's Beard. Alan Morse is a very, very technical guitar player as well. Very good guitar player. He knows what he's doing when it comes down to but he makes sure that he's not overbearing. He is the perfect guitarist of the now when it comes down to the subgenre that they are put in.
Do you guys remember the guitarist I used to play for Neil Morris' blonde kid called Paul Milatovic? He did a crazy solo, man. I gotta send you guys that video. I don't know if you remember him, like blonde hair.
No, I don't remember that, but I'll be sure to check him out.
One more before we transition. Steve Morse.
Steve Morse, for sure. Yeah, sure.
He was one of those guys in the 70s that could actually hang with the keyboard players and the violin players and everybody.
Yeah, he could. Even as of now, I mean, holy crap, that man can shred.
But yeah, He's one of my favorites. His style is very unique. Definitely. He's an alternate picking machine.
Completely agree. I mean,
he could have been an ELP.
He could have been
an ELP for his southern style.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, as much as he definitely got much better with age, but he was still a great guitar player back in the day, but he wasn't nearly as good as he was now.
Well, yeah. Right. Well, he developed so many techniques over the years. That's probably why. And the style of the band, he was like Deep Purple. Now, if you go to Dixie Dregs, it's more like prog fusiony stuff. You know what I mean? If you listen
with a little bit of bluegrass, I've heard a little bit of bluegrass.
I can see a bluegrass prog fusion thing.
Yeah,
it's very cool.
Yeah.
So now we've reached the 30-minute mark, so we're going to go ahead and transition to 3 hidden gems. I'm going to go ahead and let Josh start this off.
Okay, so for my number 3, I picked Alaska by Between the Buried and Me because I feel that nobody really started to recognize BT Bam as a proper band until Colors. And I guess in some rights, I understand that because that was just, at least for me, such a revolutionary prog album. That kind of like opened the door for me because before that, for prog, like metal, all I had heard was like Dream Theater, Queensryche, stuff like that. And so when I first heard BT Bam, I was just blown away that was a thing, that you can make prog that heavy. And I think, it's kind of obvious that I lean more towards the heavy side of things when it comes to music. But Alaska, it has some amazing songs on it that I think people forget, like Selkies. That's an amazing song from beginning to end. You got all styles in there from, blues, jazz, death metal, speed, you name it. They really got a little bit of everything in there. And there's a lot of good songs on that album. And
I agree.
I'll agree.
I feel that people, they forget about that when they start talking about BT Bam.
And as a side note, just to that, it was the very first album that my friend Andrew introduced me to. BT Bam was Alaska, and he was that song "Selk" is the end of the obsession. I was like, holy crap, who are these guys?
Yeah.
What song did I not say Selkies?
Yeah, you did.
Dad, no, you did, but that's what I'm saying. The first song that you mentioned, they really got me to them. Like that was the first song I ever heard.
Same.
That's the song that
blew my mind.
Yeah,
exactly. So go ahead.
Anyways, go ahead, Dad.
So for all 3 of my selections, I decided I'd stick with obscure, I guess, Canadian bands. And so for number 3, I picked this album from 2009, actually. And here it is. The band is called The Box. They're from Montreal. They were founded in 1981. This album is called La Orla. I think that's in French. I don't speak French, so I don't know how you pronounce it. They did a bunch of 3 or 4 or 5 very poppy albums between 84 and 90, and then they broke up for a long time, lost their record deal or whatever. And then I think in the early 2000s, they got back together. And they specifically said, we want to be more of a prog rock band, and we want to go back to speaking in French.
Yeah.
So this album's really cool in that kind of, the way that some of those old PFM albums, they're all in Italian. And it's also got that sort of Quebec French folk vibe to it.
Nice.
But it's really, really haunting in a kind of, they don't sound like Pink Floyd, but it's very dark and haunting and moody. And the album is based on some novel by, again, some guy with a French name I can't pronounce, but it was written in 1887, and it's a horror film, a horror novel. And it was about a supernatural being that drives this guy mad. So it takes you through the whole story. So it's
very Edgar Allan Poe sounding like.
Yeah, and my wife speaks French, so I can say, well, what's this song about? What are they saying? So I can follow along that way. But anyway, So for number 3, The Box, La Orla.
Go ahead, Ryan.
So my number 3 pick, I can be a little biased because these are friends of mine, but my number 3 pick is Fighting Bob by Fighting Bob. So they're like a wacky, kind of like wacky, funky.
I'm gonna pick that one
thing. Well, we can both talk about it right now.
No, I pick another one because I have another. Go ahead.
Okay. So it was a wacky kind of like prog funk fusion thing. They have a 30-minute track called Space Drums. It's it's a drum solo. It's great. I love it. Yeah, great stuff. My favorite track is it's called Molten Moonlight, which is my friend Jack's signature track. He wrote the whole thing. It's beautiful. So it's
Jack,
they're they're teenagers, but it's a great track. Very mature sounding record. Very polished.
By the way, Josh, just as a reference to Josh, is the kid I tagged today in my story, Josh, on the Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Captain Jackie. Yeah, that's him. That's who he's talking about. He's the one that leads the band.
Gotcha.
Thiago.
All right, for my number 3, I'll pick the band's called Althea. Althea. I think it's a Greek progressive metal, rock metal. And the name of the album is called The Art of Trees. It came out last year. And if you guys are into like Riverside, IQ, it's very much kind of like that.
Very nice. I like
very
that
melodic. It's like very melodic metal, very melodic prog, very full of ambience. It's kind of like very like how IQ's full of ambience and mood. Oh. But I guess they're more on the virtuoso kind of side of things.
Yeah.
Not exaggerate like Dream Theater, but
I like that.
Very.
I'll take
if you like a prog band for a mood, you feel like okay, you ended your day, you wanted some moody stuff to end your day listening. I recommend you guys Althea, Althea, and the name of the album is The Art of Trees. Superb album. I love it.
I'll go ahead and check that out for sure. I will go ahead and Thiago, I know that this is going to be that this pick very well. My number 3 is going to be Once Around the World by It Bites. Band formed in 1986 and 85 with Francis Dunnery, and you have a lot of great musicians, really well written songs. Sounds like the album. Okay, Thiago, Dad, you might want to back me up on this. I think that my description is very good. It's basically Genesis with the Beatles and Alan Holdsworth guitar solos. It's very prog. It's more.
That sounds so cool.
It's very awesome. Good. It's a great record. I would say it's a 10 out of 10 record from start to finish. Not one boring song, and it's just fantastic. Yeah.
Zoltan, I have a little bit of story about that album because and you know this very well. When we were in this studio with Terry Brown in 1990, and we were making the Kite album, he had just come from England, and he did. And you're going to correct me which IQ album he had just produced.
Are you sitting comfortably?
Sitting comfortably. He had just done that album, and he was saying, Benjamin's Kite is a lot like IQ. And he said to me, I just was when I was over in England and I was doing this album, I heard this other band, and he gave me a copy of Once Around the World. I'd never heard of It Bites, and I put it on, and it was like we totally 100% fell in love with that album.
Yeah,
it was a way. There's very few bands where you just say, "Geez, I want to copy those guys." And that album, and what's true? I saw them the next year, I think it was, and they warmed up for Jethro Tull in a hockey rink in Hamilton, Ontario. So it's like 10, 15,000, and I could not believe it. The audience basically ignored them and booed them, and I was like, "Wow!" It was like two guys who were just absolute, and they were smoking good. I mean, they were crazy good. And they looked fantastic too. They all had a perfect look, and they were great. They were super. And I was it's kind of shocked a little bit that Jethro Tull audience didn't like it.
Wow.
Yeah, I will say that the album mentality. I'll go ahead and say that for Once Around the World by It Bites, it's definitely their most. It's probably their best record for me. It's got everything that I really love from Genesis and the lyrical themes and the mood of the Beatles mixed with some Alan Holdsworth guitar solos. Definitely a really great listen. Go check it out. Josh, give us your number 2.
For number 2, I chose Nocturne by Human Abstract because I feel that you talk about an album that incorporates classical guitar with metal and prog. That's top of the list, honestly. AJ Minette was a master of incorporating classical styles with his music. It's a shame that he left the band. After that, they completely plummeted.
I agree.
Every song on that album is phenomenal from beginning to end. They have classical pieces in there that are just classical guitar. It's beautiful. I think that also people in the prog community sleep on Human Abstract, at least that album a little bit, specifically because they do have some metalcore elements. And I know that, most prog fans, that's kind of like, unknown territory. They're not the biggest fans of that, Thiago. But no, but I feel like because of that, they get a bad rep from certain genre fans. But honestly, if anybody could combine prog, classical, and metalcore and make it work, it was Human Abstract, and they did it with that album.
Okay.
All
Dad.
right, so for my second pick, I picked the band called 8 Seconds, and the album is called Big Houses. 8 Seconds, again, they're a Canadian band from Ottawa. They formed in 82, and they had a couple of albums, and including they had a really big hit in Canada, which was really, really poppy. And then for their third album, they decided they wanted to go and be a prog band, and they released this album in 1990. And, again, we were in this recording studio at that time, so it's, very contemporaneous to what we were doing. I think they sound a bit like Saga. They sound a little bit like 80s Yes, and they sound a little bit like It Bites. And there was one song that they were trying to get played on the radio, and it kind of flopped a little bit, and the song was called Tell Diane. And again, it's kind of like that It Bites album. We loved the thing so much that we basically started playing this cover. And of course, you'd be playing a song that you might as well put in one of your own songs because nobody would know it. But we loved it so much, and it fit us so much that we just kept playing it. It's a really, really fun song.
I'll also go ahead and say this, that the band is so obscure that one album, I mean, the band isn't even on Prog Archives. That's how you know when you're obscure.
Oh, yeah.
If you're not on Prog Archives, then you're obscure as hell. Bryan.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so my number 2 is Universe Zero, Used. So this isn't exactly like super, super obscure, but I felt that it doesn't get talked about as much. It's in the top 100, but it's in the top 100 because of its quality, not because people know it.
Yeah,
most bands get 2,000 ratings. This one got like 300.
So wow. Okay, so that's good. Okay, go ahead.
Well, did you say the Used?
It's called Universe Zero. The album is called Used.
Oh, the album is Used. I was like, I don't think the band that Used is prog.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've listened to the Used. They're not prog. Not by any means.
I was like, what?
Definitely not.
I've definitely listened to some idiots who think they are, though.
Guaranteed.
All right, so this band it's called, the genre is called REO, Rock in Opposition. So it's kind of like a subgenre that's based on like a music festival, which had a lot of these bands that were like in opposition to the record industry that wouldn't accept them, because these bands are pretty much out there. It's an avant-garde genre. And this one, it's really cool. They combine a lot of the postmodern sort of like chamber music, classical stylings with prog rock and a lot of winds and stuff. So if you like stuff like Frank Zappa and like Gentle Giant and also classical music, I think you would dig this one. But it's definitely a tough listen. You have to be in the mindset to listen to something kind of out there.
Oh yeah, I know. That's a very weird one.
But I greatly enjoy it. It's atonal at times, but I definitely enjoy it.
Thiago?
All right. This band is my second pick, which was a hard one, man. Oof, that's so many.
Yeah.
But because they're being so cool with me, I mean, I started following these guys on Instagram probably like a few months ago, and they followed me back. They've been talking to me. And I checked the stuff out on YouTube, and I could have picked easily any album from them. But this one, the first one I listened to, is from a band from Greece as well, progressive metal, rock, some stuff, some experimental, some extreme metal there. It's Until Rain, and the name of the album is Anthem to Creation. And which kind of the name, kind of like in the cover of the album, the name kind of like made me remember a little bit of Antediluvian Euphonies for some reason, because Anthem to Creation. And, it's I think the vocalist is a female too, which kind of like, I know Bryan, you're very like picky with that, but she's good. And I mean, they don't have just a straight up sound where it's just metal, right? It's very like conceptual. Like, you hear the name Anthem to Creation, you would think that, forces of nature, whatever. So they're very big into
epic
that
kind of stuff.
Epic kind of stuff, exactly. Almost like to biblical proportions. I don't know their faith, but I'm just saying, like, the kind of sound that they're trying to create.
Yeah, of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
And so yeah, that's another name, Anthem to Creation by Until Rain. That's the name of the band. I think they released a new album this year, if I'm not mistaken. But like I said, I could have picked any album. So without any further ado, I think Zoltan's your turn for the first one.
This is my turn. My second pick is it's going to be Islands. They are a band from Switzerland. They released this album in 1977. They're very strange. They're kind of like ELP mixed with Van der Graaf Generator mixed with Happy the Man a bit. So it's kind of like ELP and Van der Graaf gone a little bit jazz fusion. It's very, very strange. It's a very, very, very quirky album for sure. Oh, we dropped
Thiago?
Thiago dropped. I'm just going to wait until he's back.
Went to get another glass of water.
Yeah. But yeah. Where the hell did he go?
Don't ask, but Thiago, don't ask.
Oh, there he is. Jesus. So what I was talking about was it's a very, very, very strange and very weird listen. It's very eclectic prog. It's a little avant-garde, and I mean, even there's 3 vocalists. However, the main one, I think for half of the album, did like a gas vocals, which is basically just it's a very weird concept. I don't exactly know how it works, but it's a very interesting band. Love it. And the artist who did the album cover for the album called Islands by Island, and was the same guy who did the album cover for Brain Salad Surgery. So, that's pretty cool.
Oh, nice.
So Josh, number 1.
All right, so for my number 1, and I know this is no, new thing for most prog fans, but for me, this was a completely hidden gem that I had no idea existed. And when I found out about it, I was completely blown away. And that is England by the Pound, Selling England by the Pound. That album, I had no idea ever existed. I did not know Genesis was prog. I mean, I'm a huge 80s pop guy. So for me, Phil Collins, Genesis, they were just, 80s pop songs, which I love. Don't get me wrong. That's my stuff. But, amazing. But when Thiago showed me Selling England by the Pound, my jaw was on the floor for the rest of the night. I couldn't believe it. I did not know that they did that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I cursed your dad out for never showing you that album. The old
It's true. Shame on him.
I had a similar reaction when I listened to it too, because I was a prog metal guy for years, and then I got introduced to prog rock, and I was like, "What?"
Yeah. So that was just such a surprise. Shame on Phil Collins for what he did to that band.
I can't blame Phil Collins too much, but it's definitely one of his. It's definitely he's the culprit. Dad.
All right, so for my number 1, again from Canada, this band is formed in Toronto in 1976, and this was their debut album from 1977, FM, Black Noise. This band is it's space rock and jazz fusion.
Whoa!
And it's a 3-piece band with a drummer, a violinist, and then a keyboard player who plays bass and is their lead singer. And you might wonder how he managed to do that, but even in 1977, there was enough synth power that he could program his keyboard parts and some of his bass parts. He did a lot of bass parts that were on keyboards. And then he could sing and maybe play bass or just play the lead keyboard parts or whatever. Yeah. And I remember because I saw them warm up for Rush maybe 3 times. They played my high school. Yeah, in, I don't know, 80 or 81 or something like that. And I remember that the drummer at that time he had headphones on, so he was probably following a click in order to keep in. Yeah, but they could do it. They could make it sound like it sounds like there's 5 people playing on the album, but really it's only 3.
Wow.
And I think they did about 7 or 8 albums, but they never really matched the magic of the first one. There's 2 or 3 after that are pretty good. Surveillance is good, City of Fear is pretty good, and the directed one's really good. And then in the 80s, they really tried to copy Phil Collins. And they didn't do too bad at it. I don't think anybody wants to hear FM doing Phil Collins.
No.
So they flopped miserably. And I don't know. I think they finally came back with an album a few years ago. I don't know, but they were gone for 25 to 30 years. I don't know.
Yeah,
I would go so far as to say I would be, well, if people heard it, maybe it would be different. But for me, I would think it should be in the top 50 prog albums of all time. Maybe not in the top 20, but it's that good. It's amazing.
Isn't the first song called Phasers on Stun?
Yeah.
They love Trek. That's no surprise. Bryan.
Well, my number one is finally one that I don't think any of you have heard about. It's not, so the band is called Circus, the album called Circus.
Yes.
But it's not Circus, the eclectic prog band from Switzerland or Germany, one of those. It's Circus, the English jazz fusion band that had Mel Collins on saxophone.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that album.
I know that band.
They're amazing. So if you can get past the fact that like half the album is covers, it's incredible. The songs are great. The melodies are great. The saxophone playing is great. It's a complete hidden gem. And despite only having like 16 reviews, it's at a 4.25 on Prog Archives. So if that says anything, even the Prog Archives people liked it. So it must be good.
Thiago.
All right, this was a difficult one because okay. So this band is from 1974. Okay, it's old school stuff. It's from France. I don't know if Bryan, if you heard of this band called Speed Limit and their self-titled album Speed Limit. They're more into the whole jazz rock fusion thing as well. Very like El Dimiola, Weather Report kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They released a bunch of albums. They were growing in the 70s and 80s. But, as prog was dying, at least the classic prog was started to die by the hands, of pop, electronic music back then. Basically, the members veered into other projects. And they have like classical music, like 20th century, 19th century classical music inspiration as well. It's not that long of an album. It's like 39 minutes, but they have all their albums, which are great as well. But I loved it. As short as it was very experimental, and I loved it. I don't know. You back, Zoltan?
I am back.
And
let me do an honorable mention.
Osric Tentacles.
Osric Tentacles, yeah.
Guys, I haven't done my number one.
Oh, do you
I know. We were waiting for you. We were waiting time. Yeah,
exactly.
All right, so I'm back, and I might have to cut that part out. Oops.
That's all right.
Oh, Jesus, that is such shit. Anyways, I don't know what happened. Apparently the internet fucked up, and then it was just like, nope, no, it's not happening. So if you guys were going through honorable mentions, I mean, I had a few, but
we can do it after your number one.
I think that my number one is going to be Lift by Lift, another band from 1977, and it was more space rock, much more space rock. Very good album. It was it was a great album. It had its it's space rock.
It's space rock.
It is space rock.
It's not something I've ever heard of until this very moment, so it's something I'm interested in checking out.
Yeah, I bet.
Space rock.
I don't know what's happening. Where's my camera?
Oh, it's back now.
Where's my camera?
It's like psychedelics.
Is it back?
It's like Pink
Crazy
Floyd
odd.
Is my camera back?
You know what I mean? It's progressive psychedelic.
Camera
more like.
What is happening here?
Josh, think of the themes like in that movie that we liked, Solaris.
Yeah, right.
God,
remember the video I put out that he said he felt like you were in space with the chord progression? That's the type of stuff they do.
Gotcha. Okay.
Cool shit. I have an honorable mention.
Go ahead.
Is my camera on?
I actually have 2 honorable mentions. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It doesn't say it's on.
Well, it's on.
You're good, man.
All right.
So, just a quick question. Parallax by BT Band be considered space metal?
Probably a little bit.
The arrangement.
The second Parallax 2.
Yeah, the arrangements there is very
I guess
Lydian dominant inspired. So that's what they kind of use for the spacey stuff. For example, Dream Theater's Hell Kitchen, even though it's a very melodic set tune, like those beginning chords sound very like space
It is a great song.
Yeah.
Camera was back for a second.
So,
the Octavarium intro is pretty space rock to me.
Yeah, I could see that from the sound that I'm getting you guys describing.
Like Pink Floyd, like that kind of stuff, like, Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah.
That's a key example. Like early Porcupine Tree, that kind of stuff. I have 2 honorable mentions. One of them it's not an unknown band, but it's definitely one that Zoltan was pushing me to listen to, and Thiago was pushing me to listen to, and they're not in the 250.
Yeah.
Get Stardust We Are by the Flower Kings onto the 250 on Prog Archive.
Completely agree.
It
totally agree.
It was really good. And there's albums like Kind of Blue that aren't prog, aren't jazz fusion, that are on the 250. And I think to myself, what are they doing? Why isn't a real prog band on there?
That could be kind of subjective.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, I'm gonna have to stop recording for God's sake.
You're back.
Oh, great. Okay, so I'm not gonna have any face cam for the rest of this. Okay. All right, that pisses me off quite a bit, but let's continue. Oh no, now Hangouts is going through so many technical difficulties. Why? No. For God's sake. Okay. Oh my God.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I got disconnected from Hangouts for 3 times.
This is such bullshit.
Thiago, bust out the katana.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
But this time for Hangouts.
Irking. Why? All right, my honorable mention.
There it is. Got this going.
I'm gonna get through this because I'm so sick of this. I just want to get through this. Anyways, my honorable mention will be The Weirding by Astra. Great, another space rock band, psychedelic, very kind of like Pink Floyd mixed with Genesis. Very interesting, very cool.
Ooh, nice.
Very good album. Very good.
No, I gave out the 2, so you guys might give away other 2 honorable mentions too, because I did 3 honorable mentions after my 3 main ones.
What were they?
You guys feel like? Huh?
What were they?
Oh, well, hold on. I gotta go through this stuff again. Right here. You sure you want to listen? You don't want to listen to that
Here
stuff?
We go again.
Say, okay, Osric Tentacles, Pungent Effulgent, 1989.
Yeah.
Psychedelic prog electronic rock. The other one, let me go up here. Kaleidon, I think they're from Greece too. Kaleidon. And the name of the album is Free Love from 1973. It's progressive rock, jazz rock too, as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds great.
And I think there's another Dice, self-titled album. Dice. I think they're from Sweden. It's a symphonic progressive rock in 1978.
Yeah. So,
all right. I got one more I would like to bring up.
Bring it on.
A band called Kyrie Elison. Gerard Krampel's band.
Nice.
Their self-titled record. Okay. Self-titled record. Their only release. It's like a symphonic prog kind of Genesis thing. It's really, really good. So I would recommend you guys check it out.
I think you told me about it. I remember.
I talked about it on the first podcast. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it.
I don't think you did. I don't know. I don't think so.
I remember distinctly that I did.
All right. Let's move on to the
Anybody
last
else? Josh, Bryan, do you guys have any honorable mentions at all or no?
No, I think we pretty much covered it.
Yeah, I'm
Bryan?
good.
Yeah,
I'm good.
You good? Okay.
All right, let's move on to the last subject of the video, and then we'll cover a little bit of Chris Squire. The new progressive music and how old progressive music has influenced it. So, Josh, why not you go ahead and start us off with the subject? We'll jump in when we can.
I mean, I don't think there's really too much that you can say about what influenced. They took all the things like, different styles, using every style that you can, odd time signatures, using all elements, all instruments, and kind of just got heavier over the, decades that came after. It was like, double bass came in. Like you said, guitarists got more prominent. Guys started screaming. They started growling. So pretty much they took all the old elements, like I said, and just kind of like added small, heavier pieces, double bass, and just kind of got more technical and heavier as time went on. And like we said before, like you look at guys like Tolson Abasi, they're just, taking techniques and perfecting them and just, revolutionizing the whole thing.
Exactly.
Right. That's true.
Sounds great. Ryan, Thiago, anyone, go ahead.
I mean, I can talk about how, a band like Dream Theater, especially, they really carried on the torch for Rush, really. When Rush was going all mainstream,
Very true.
in the late 80s, Dream Theater came in. They brought back that technicality. They had that sort of same ethos as Rush, because Rush at that time were very high caliber players, if you really think about it. So Dream Theater carried that ethos, the riff style, the writing style. They brought in a bit of the grandiose arrangements of Yes, the technicality of jazz fusion, the metal sounds of like Iron Maiden and Queensryche, and they made that kind of thing. Other bands too, Gentle Giant has influenced, Hacken in a very significant way on a lot of their newer albums, on like The Mountain and stuff.
Great album.
Yeah, it's a great album. Yeah,
great freaking album.
Well, yeah, it's one of my favorites of the last 10 years for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty obvious to see how a lot of the older prog bands have influenced the newer ones. Even within the older bands, King Crimson was so instrumental in making Genesis sound like Genesis. If you really think about it.
Yeah, that's true.
They were listening to so much King Crimson in the early days.
Ryan, it's like we talked about earlier, though. Like, these bands at first, like you said, with Dream Theater carrying the torch for Rush, they sound like their predecessors for a little bit until they start to develop their own sound. And for me, that's just kind of the genre progressing and revolutionizing. They got to start somewhere. They got to have a platform. And then from there, they kind of just branch off and try new techniques, and it just grows into what it is today.
Most bands have that kind of thing where in the beginning they're very derivative, and then until they actually find their sound. And then those are the bands who break through when they have something unique to offer.
Yeah, of course. I will go ahead and bring in a key that was fairly we have all these bands that keep coming in. You have Caligula's Horse taking the more acoustic and more electronic approach to the old bands, and the influence is definitely there, but they definitely do it in a more unique way than a lot of other bands. I would say that they carry on the torch for a lot of other bands. However, they also do it in such a way more unique way that it's totally different when they actually get through, and you have to listen to their stuff a lot more to understand what kind of influence they have. Another band that I can say continues that kind of stuff is Steven Wilson himself. I mean, you have
up till recently.
I would say that there are some songs. I would say that there are some songs on even On To The Bone.
He's not prog.
I would say that there are some stuff on even On To The Bone, like Detonation. That song is pretty prog. That's a 10-minute song, and it's pretty good. But I would say that for the most part, you have Grace for Drowning, Hand Cannot Erase, and Insurgentes, The Raven That Refused to Sing, and Other Stories. All those albums were definitely trying to carry on the Alan Parsons approach to progressive rock, where it also had the influences of like jazz fusion, all those like Van der Graaf, and a little bit of all those kind of great bands in one, and it was kind of a unified thing with a little bit of a kind of like Crosby, Stills and Nash-esque harmonies, and a lot of Beach Boys-esque harmonies as well. So it's very, very interesting to hear all those kind of great things. And
don't forget a little bit of the Jethro throwing luminol. The flutes over there.
Oh, yeah.
A little bit.
I was going to interject
about different instrument incorporation.
Yeah, there is a little bit.
If we actually listen to what Guthrie says about that album.
That song is flute galore.
Oh, yeah, it is a flute.
He's a flute king.
Thing. Yeah.
Oh, of course, but I wouldn't say that Jethro Tull was the main influence on that one song specifically.
No, I didn't say it was the main, but you definitely can hear once
you can hear an influence.
Chooses a song that's very like classically progressive. you hear the flute over there. And you're like, yep,
Yeah,
there you go.
course.
Even though my man said he's not progressive, you know.
Oh, okay.
If I may interject,
go ahead.
What I read about Guthrie was saying about that album was that the whole idea was that the early albums Steven Wilson did was like a lot of Porcupine Tree, very mellow kind of stuff like he was doing in that band. But with the Raven, the whole idea was to do like, an old rock style album, but with jazz fusion caliber players. So he brought people like Guthrie Govan from Miniman to be very loose and to be able to do so many different things because, they aren't the typical prog musician. I would say they're a cut above what is the typical prog musician in a lot of certain respects. But that album especially is a love letter to everything old prog. You can hear it.
Definitely.
From Alan Parsons being, the producer to, the flutes on Lubanol and even there's almost a King Crimson kind of vibe to the Holy Drinker in a sense.
There is, for sure.
It is a love letter to old prog.
Definitely.
Through.
When it comes down to the Watchmaker, especially, you literally have a YYZ cameo in there. You literally, there is a YYZ cameo in the Watchmaker.
Yep.
There is.
When? I've never noticed it. I've listened to that album a lot.
It's around the last maybe 2-3 minutes of the song.
Okay.
It's definitely 100% YYZ, no question about it.
And is it very apparent? Because I've never noticed
very
it.
apparent.
All right.
It's pretty open.
Let Bryan
go ahead, Dad.
Yeah, I have a totally different perspective than you guys because I come from a totally different generation. And, in the late 70s when people were, the mainstream press had a complete hatred for anything progressive rock. It was kind of cool around 1970, but by 1975, it was like, this is all pompous. It's all overblown. We don't want to hear this. And, it just fell out of favor. And a lot of the heavy rock bands of those days, they were also totally prog haters. And they said it. You'd see them in interviews and they'd pick on they didn't even have to listen to They Don't Want To, but they would pick on Jethro Tull or they'd pick on Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And they would say...
Sounds like Zeppelin or...
I remember specifically seeing Kiss, Gene Simmons.
Kiss.
Come on.
And
Kiss are musicians.
Because you got to stand on.
I don't know about...
Zeppelin, you can say, they actually had some prog influence too. And they wouldn't disrespect prog. But I saw that when we were talking about the second episode about the Crest of a Knave, the controversy with the Metallica Grammy, people made fun of Jethro Tull. They said,
true. They laughed him out of the building.
They come here with these flutes. That's not rock and roll. And I'm like, who cares? It's cool. It's good.
They were doing that all the way from the late 70s all the way to the late 80s of just people who liked heavy music. And I just picked Kiss because that guy used to beat up on ELP. But I can't imagine one guy at a Motorhead concert or at a Iron Maiden concert that also went to a Jethro Tull concert.
Iron Maiden was a band of prog heads.
I started with Iron Maiden. Still to this day, my favorite band.
I love Iron Maiden. That was my first metal band.
Yeah,
same band that made me want to play guitar.
Steve
I think
Harris
Iron Maiden is a prog influence band.
Steve Harris has made so many. Has went on so many websites and had interviewed, and he was like, I know that there was one recently where he was saying after Peter Gabriel left, Genesis wasn't the same, and I read that and I was just like, he's right. And he did say that there was some prog after, but Steve Harris is a huge progressive rock fan, and he's always been a huge prog fan. Everyone in Iron Maiden are huge prog fans.
You can see how Iron Maiden has a lot of concept music, concept art, concept albums.
Seventh Son.
That is progressive.
Day is a prog
yes.
Okay.
In the name of God.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I don't know. Maybe in the 80s, Bryan, but right now, if you get to the
Prime of the Ancient Mariner.
Fan, if you take a typical Iron Maiden fan nowadays, I don't know, maybe in the 80s it was different, but right now, a typical Iron Maiden fan would definitely love the progressive scene. Maybe back then because metal was coming up, replacing the old genres.
Especially that style of metal.
Right. Everybody didn't like soft shit, back in the 80s and 90s. Or if you listen to softer rock music, oh, you gay.
Right.
You know what I mean? not a man. So I think that's a stupid attitude. And I blame Metallica for that shit. I don't even blame Iron Maiden. I blame Metallica for that shit.
Oh, Metallica.
You know, the whole rough guy, you know what I mean? I'm a tough guy, kind of bullshit. And Iron Maiden has always been about the musicality of things.
Absolutely.
They brought Dream Theater on tour.
Yeah, exactly. So
Bruce Dickinson's a damn opera singer, for God's sake.
He is. Exactly. They're a prog band. We forget, but the thing I think what Bryan was trying to get at was that their early sound was very punkish, very brash. They had a singer that wasn't Bruce Dickinson. They had Paul Diano, and that sound was very different. We don't talk about
the pre-Bruce Dickinson days, okay?
Definitely, if they had Bruce Dickinson, it would have been better. But
it's like that one album that they had later on in the early 2000s without Bruce. We don't forget about that album, okay?
Yeah,
that was definitely we don't talk about.
Don't talk about it.
I think it's great that a lot of bands, you know, that they're okay with all that stuff and being able to play well and concept pieces. And I think it's fantastic that they borrowed all this stuff. I'm saying is it's a bit surprising to a guy from my generation that the music in the 70s would have seemed like the people were the furthest apart, right? So to be the people that would never get along on anything. And now you guys, your generation is like, it's all cool. So I think it's great. I think it's fantastic.
You got to respect where it started, Bryan. You know what I'm saying? You have to have respect.
Yeah, of course.
Which brings a good point that a lot of people, especially like to become the night prog generation, they don't have any respect for the old stuff. They think that prog is polyphia and periphery, and I'm like, they don't know. They've never listened to Close to the Edge.
Ryan, we had to deal with one of those numbskulls on Instagram.
Oh, tell them about.
By the way, I'll say this, Bryan. You know this idiot's called the classic progressive era. Get this. I had one of these idiots. By the way.
Jesus.
They call it dead. They call it dead prog.
Dead prog.
Dad prog.
Yeah,
like boomer prog. Dad prog.
Yeah, boomer prog. Shit your dad you listens to. I don't listen to this. That stuff your old man.
Oh, dad. I thought you said dad.
Yeah, dad. Oh, dad. So I'm like, is that such a thing as dad jazz, dad pop? Then you freaking idiots, dude. That is the OG prog. If you must name it anything.
Yeah, it's because that generation thinks that prog started in 2010, Thiago.
When in reality, the genre was started in 1967. 1966.
Exactly.
Right. And by the way, this is a dude that was defending. This was a dude that was defending Gojira being a prog metal band, and I kept asking him which part of it is prog. Because I listened to 3 albums by Gojira, I saw no prog at all. So please, sir, explain to me how's it prog. And all you have to do is insult the old classic prog. Oh, you listen to that prog? No, sir. I listen to Dream Theater. I listen to Haken. I listen to Between the Babies. Exactly. I said I listen to all the eras of prog. Please explain to me how is this new stuff, you guys? Everybody wants to call it prog. Avenged Sevenfold to be called prog now. What? Evanescence now is going to be called prog?
Thiago, whale noises, buddy.
Whale noises.
Don't you know that's progressive?
I'm just gonna say, I mean, like these people don't respect the old prog generation at all. I mean, there are a few. Like, I mean, you listen to Tool talk about King Crimson, and they're like, we love King Crimson, and everyone in Tool loves King Crimson. Everyone in Tool loves King Crimson. They are King Crimson fanatics. They love Robert Fripp. I mean, they are Tool fanatics. Not Tool fanatics. I mean, King Crimson fanatics. Yes, they love themselves. They love themselves.
Talk about the bands like Dream Theater.
I don't think Fripp will be a Tool fanatic, Zoltan.
I don't think he's a Tool fanatic.
Well, they have the same ethos about streaming, so
yeah, they
have something in common. They can talk about that.
Oh yeah, they definitely do. I'll go ahead and say
the thing is, a band like Dream Theater, all these modern guys idolize. You see Portnoy in these interviews, and he's holding up his King Crimson vinyls and his Genesis vinyls and his Yes vinyls,
and he's
praising these guys. And he's basically a small Neil Peart.
Yeah,
for sure. And he likes the country folks of like America, Steely Dan. He likes Allen Brothers, all that stuff. Exactly.
Yeah.
And those not blues, but those like folk guys like Allman Brothers and like Bryan said earlier, Doobie Brothers. Those guys mess around with like weird things in their songs. You know, they're not completely straightforward.
Cheated the Hangman. That's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
It's great.
America? No. Who made that?
Aren't those guys in Dream Theater?
I Cheat the Hangman is Doobie Brothers.
Okay.
Aren't the guys in Dream Theater? Aren't they like more like my age?
Yeah, exactly. Like,
they're in their 50s, right?
Yeah. SmackDown.
I don't know.
Yeah, they are.
Mike Mangini, I think he's what, 56, 57?
No, I'm pretty sure Rudess is 60 years old.
Yes, no, Rudess is 63. Rudess is 63.
Patricia's like 52 though.
Well, you look at guys like Mayung. He looks like he could pass for like 30, and then you look at guys like Labrie. He looks like he's been preserved in formaldehyde.
Oh my God, Labrie.
Some of these bands where they do have a love for that old progressive rock music. Yeah. Actually, they're not 30 years old, right?
They're not.
Right. Exactly.
They're so much older.
So because they were the next generation after that, they carried it on.
They did.
And Ackerfeld's not young either.
Ackerfeld's 47. He's 46.
Yeah. So those seem like dad prog to me.
It don't seem like dad prog to me.
Ridiculous thing.
No, listen. This is how idiotic it is, because when I was listening to Selling In by the Pound for the first time, and I think even Josh picked it up when I showed him Cinema Show, I'm like, bro, this sounds like Octavarian conceptually wise, big time.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think they got it from?
Where did they get it from?
And you're like, if you listen to the old stuff, you hear the new stuff. Whatever you call new or old, anyways.
You know what I mean? My first Genesis record was Nursery Crime. So I heard the Fountain of Salamakis, and they do the guitar and the keyboard interplay, and I'm like, where did Dream Theater get that from?
But you're like, nothing's new. Everything's been done.
Hey, that's the way the music.
Dream Theater is unoriginal.
Yeah.
Why?
I'll say this one last thing to those new quote unquote proggers who do not listen to the old stuff just because it's old. Then you're not a progressive rock fan. Sorry, that's the reality of the situation.
I'm just gonna say, if you've never listened to In the Court of the Crimson King or Close to the Edge, you're not a prog fan.
You're not or Selling England. Selling England for sure. I mean,
the rest of
you gotta do Josh dirty like
England.
that.
You have to listen to Pink Floyd. You have to listen to Wish You Were Here, Close to the Edge.
I mean, I grew up on Pink Floyd and Rush and stuff like that.
If you guys don't listen to that stuff, then you guys are not progressive rock fans. You guys aren't prog metal fans. You guys are are so-called prog fans who do not know what prog is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that Josh, isn't your dad's second favorite band? Yes, after Rush.
Yeah, I think it's Rush. Yes, ELP, and then Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, great stuff. So that's
and Pink Floyd. He always says nowadays, like Pink Floyd and the Beatles have crawled into his top couple, and they're probably in my top 5 as well.
Yep.
Same.
Right. By the way, I didn't say the influences, by the way, and I'll say real quick. Can I?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
We just said concept albums. I think one of the hugest influences in the old prog versus the new prog is concept albums, because it wasn't really being done in the 80s as much.
No, it wasn't.
Right?
You're right.
Concept albums.
Yeah.
And made a resurgence, I say, with Opeth, Dream Theater, Symphony X, and Porcupine Tree. You know what I mean? Telling the tales, because progressive bands are not really known for romantic songs, and I think that's one of the things that freaking idiot Gene Simons was bashing, because Kiss is all about sex and drugs and whatever.
Sex, drugs, and rock
progressive
and roll,
music, right? Progressive music is all about like concepts, philosophy, exploring.
You listen
tales,
to Gentle Giant, it's all philosophy. It's all history.
It's about being open-minded.
Everything is.
It's about cool shit.
Exactly.
Incorporating all styles.
Yeah.
Right. So questions of faith, questions of everything that they can touch, and even if it doesn't happen in the real world, I don't care. I'm gonna tell you a story. So I think that's one of the biggest ways that the old progressive guard influenced the new one, and I'll go with that.
Yeah.
Bryan, you were trying to say something?
You know, Gene Simmons and those kind. I mean, he's got a perfectly legitimate point of view, but his point of view is that music is supposed to be for fun and drinking and partying.
Yeah,
it's not. That was his point of view, and so that's why, early
his music maybe
as far away from what he wants to do, because it's not about. It's about really, really good playing, and it's really serious. So that's the opposite. Just getting drunk and trying to find girls.
Yeah,
Kiss made a disco album. They have no room to talk.
They made a Broadway album too called "Music from the Elder."
Well, there you go. Even more.
Let's not forget that. So.
Let's not forget.
Zoltan, are you doing?
If I may interject about the concept albums, and we talk about the old influence, when Dream Theater was making their Scenes from a Memory album, you see Mike Portnoy was doing his vlogging and stuff, and so they go to something they have called the Inspiration Corner, which had all their favorite concept albums. And one that was front and center, they were waving around, The Lamb, for sure.
The Lamb,
super influential by Genesis. So yeah, people can't disregard that influence. I don't know why people are doing that.
Absolutely.
They don't even know nowadays where the idea of concept albums come from. If you ask like this, I don't want to say the term, but millennials,
we are millennials, Thiago.
Well, technically, but we don't. Not the younger millennials. I don't count Zoltan and Bryan, because I'm talking about behavior-wise versus just being born. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And you ask them like, okay, which concept album from certain band is your favorite? Like, what do you mean concept album? I'm like, yeah, an album that's about a story, a tale, an idea. They don't even know what that is. You know what I mean?
Oh my god! I mean, I'm gonna go ahead and say this. I mean, when you look at Close to the Edge, I mean, the lyrical themes are there, but I think that the only real piece of that album that is actual conceptual is the title track. Siberian Couture doesn't really follow the concept of the rest of the album, and of course, I mean, neither does And You and I. It's a bit of a different concept, but I think that probably the most famous concept album of all time has to be The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. That is probably the most famous concept album ever recorded.
Not the most famous, but definitely the most influential in terms of prog.
And when we're
talking about real prog,
when you look at it now, I mean, the album as of now, I mean, it's apparently, according to the records that I have, and I would like to pull them up, but I don't want to destroy the recording, is that as of now, The Lamb has sold, I think, 10 to 15 million as of now. Yeah, it's sold so much, and it's probably the most famous concept record. It's probably one of the bigger ones. Another one that I would go ahead and say that maybe Ziggy Stardust is one of the bigger concept records. Ziggy Stardust.
There you go.
Quadrophenia, yeah.
The Wall by Pink Floyd is
Pink Floyd is huge. Same with one other one. Probably one of the bigger ones as well is you have albums like from Jethro Tull, like Thick as a Brick and a Passion Play, and all of those albums are concepts. However,
Tales from Topographic Oceans.
Tales from Topographic Oceans is their concept record. Does
that have Whale Sounds too?
No. But concept records have been a prominent figure in the progressive rock scene for even up until the first real progressive rock concept record was Days of Future Past by the Moody Blues. That was an actual concept record. It was a concept record. Yeah. However, if I'm going to go ahead and say what actually kind of started the genre and helped it progress, I mean, Yes has quoted this album as something that helped them pick up their feet, but I'm going to talk about this in a video of my own eventually. Mm-hmm. Keep an eye out for that, but bands have been quoting, and it's an art rock album. It's psychedelia and progressive pop. Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. People have been citing that as a huge influence, especially Yes.
Interesting.
Yes, John Anderson has talked about the vocal harmonies. Like, of course. The Edge. Those harmonies, like in the Get Up, Get Down part. The echoey kind of stuff. That's very Beach Boys, very Beatles.
Super Beach Boys. And I'm going to go ahead and say this. I mean, I honestly do believe that when it comes down to the Beach Boys, Pet Sounds is one of the first original albums that helped start progressive rock. it helped start up the
it's
new
definitely
prog
the first
scene.
art rock album.
It's definitely the first art rock, and that was the thing that helped the Moody Blues get their first album, Days of Future Past.
Yeah.
They were influenced by the art rock elements in Pet Sounds, and then it went forth and foremost. And now we know it as the genre that we love today.
And if we look at history, we see that Pet Sounds released before Sgt. Pepper, and we know historically that the Beach Boys and the Beatles had this like rivalry that they had to top each other.
Yeah.
So the Beach Boys drop Pet Sounds, and the Beatles say to themselves, "We got to top this." So they do Sgt. Pepper.
They did.
Which is, it's like a bigger version.
Obviously
of Pet
blew
Sounds.
up. I mean,
yeah,
it
was a moderate success.
It was, Pet Sounds was definitely the one that helped start it, though. I mean, without Pet Sounds, you wouldn't have Sgt. Pepper's, because I don't think the Beatles would have been as enthralled to get into the studio and record Sgt. Pepper's had it not been for Pet Sounds, which was the very starting point for art rock and progressive rock, because it had art rock elements and it had progressive pop. Yeah. It had progressive pop, it was art rock, it was psychedelia, it was pop rock. It was basically the first art rock album ever recorded, and it was the start.
I would agree.
It's the footnote of progressive rock and its history.
It's when rock stopped being teeny bopper songs like the Beatles, and then really started being something else.
Oh yeah, because the Beach Boys originally were a teeny pop band, and then right as soon as they released Pet Sounds, they went this dark and really weird place. So I mean, you have songs like
great songs though,
still great. But I mean, later on in 1971,
pop hit?
That's a great song. But as soon as you have bands like, you have the album Surf's Up, you have songs like Till I Die, which is so dark in terms of lyrical content.
Oh yeah.
And you have songs like Surf's Up, which is probably their darkest song they've ever written. It's just the lyrical theme in that song is just retardedly dark. It's ridiculous. It makes you feel like you're enthralled, and you're just sitting there just thinking, what the hell am I listening to? And, And I mean, again, without the Beach Boys, I mean, Yes wouldn't have done Close to the Edge, maybe.
Had those beautiful harmonies. We would have had Close to the Edge, but it wouldn't have been nearly as haunting.
It wouldn't have been nearly as good.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this for one more thing. I think that, because apparently I was wrong on one account. Billy Sherwood, the producer for Yes for quite a while, is and the bassist as of now. Apparently Chris Squire made him the successor for Yes.
Oh.
And apparently I think that they're not releasing a new album as of now, but they are planning on releasing a new album. But I've heard Billy Sherwood's I've heard Billy Sherwood's solo stuff, and it's actually very Yes-y. So I have faith that a new Yes record might actually be good, but I have faith that I also think that it might be a flop. Kind of like
it's got John Davison, so I'm not exactly excited.
I'm not either, because he's not a great writer.
Cautiously optimistic.
Yeah,
that's how I am right now.
Yeah, same here. But
how about we talk about this on the next subject then?
Chris Squire.
Exactly. Yeah, this is Chris Squire. Right. Dad, why not you start us off with the Chris Squire?
I'll just say a couple of things. I mean, I've seen Yes 10 times. I looked up the years. It spans a 29-year period. So the first time I saw Yes was 1984, so that was the 90125 tour. I don't think you could have seen them in 82, 83, because I don't think after Drama they weren't really around until.
Yeah, they weren't around. Yeah.
So in 1980 I was only 15, so it's tough to get to a concert. Although I did see I seen Queen in 1980. So, and the last album, the last tour I saw was in 2013. So that was a 3-album tour. So anyway, 10 times, and the great thing about going to Yes concerts has always been is that they play their old stuff and the full catalog. And you can't say that about a lot of other bands. They abandon all the old stuff, right? Yeah, like Genesis notorious in the 80s, and I didn't go for the Invisible Touch or the tours after that because they didn't play any of the old stuff, so I didn't go. Uh-huh. But Yes would, and Chris Squire, I mean, he's a really prominent on stage. He's got a huge stage presence. Bass playing is fantastic, and he's also, without his vocals, I'm not really sure that a lot of that old stuff would sound like that. And one last thing I would say, I just was thinking about all that because I looked up all the times I saw them, and I think that there was a bunch that were really good, but one I remember was really, really good was the 30th anniversary tour.
Wow!
I saw them here in Toronto. That was 1998, and I remember this because it was such a cool thing. The warm-up band was Alan Parsons.
Great!
The only other time I've seen such a killer double bill is I once in the 90s I saw Emerson, Lake and Palmer warm up for Jethro Tull.
Wow.
I mean, how do you even call that a warm up? I mean, that's the full warm up right there.
It's a code tour.
Right off the bat.
Yeah, I think it was when Emerson and Palmer got back together, and maybe they did, I don't know, In the Hot Seat or Black Moon or whatever, one of those, and so they weren't as well known anymore. But it was a great double bill. I mean, unbelievable. But Alan Parsons and yes, wow.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I think that you saw the Symphonic Live tour as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I saw that. That was absolutely amazing. I saw that someplace in outside of Washington, D.C., in some amphitheater.
Oh, wow.
It was one of those buried amphitheaters, and they had it was a beautiful summer's night. It was a fantastic concert.
Awesome.
Oh man, I think that they did a lot of old stuff on that tour. A lot of old stuff. They didn't play much of stuff from Magnification on that tour at all, I don't think.
I wouldn't think if they had the orchestra, they would have to play a lot of the newer stuff. They would have to play the old stuff, the more symphonic prog stuff.
Because, Magnification, by definition, is a symphonic prog album.
It is
if you go ahead, because it has a symphony, it has an orchestra, and I think that, I think that that if you gave it another listen, I think that you might actually like it a bit more than you do. But I think that Magnification actually it's not all that bad. It's actually pretty good.
It's a pretty good album.
It's got a lot. There's a few dud songs on the album overall, but I think most of it's really strong.
To me, it's the best Yes album since Drama.
Oh, I'll go ahead and say that the best album from to present from their latest, from maybe Drama. I'll go ahead and say Fly From Here, only because of the fact that it was written
original.
It was written between going for the one in Drama.
Yeah.
Right.
Which, Fly From Here is very classic sounding, yes, and Benoit David is a fantastic singer.
All right.
But I'm gonna say my one part. Chris Squire. I saw him once, and what was it that was I don't know, that couldn't have been the Fly From Here tour. It wasn't. I don't believe so. Was it? No.
I don't remember. I know you saw him. I don't know. How many concerts have you been to, Zoli?
About 20, 25 now. Yeah, about there.
Wow.
I've seen a lot, but Chris Squire, from the presence that I remember and the footage that I remember seeing and what I saw in real life, I can confirm that he was incredible. He was the most solid one in the entire band when I saw them.
Oh, he's the one that been the longest serving member, if I'm not mistaken, right?
He was the only
only original member at that point. Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah.
He to me is yes.
But I think that we saw Benoit David dead.
I just don't remember.
It wasn't John Davison. It was Benoit David, if I'm not mistaken. But I think that as much as Fly From Here was great, I think that From a Page, produced by Oliver Wakeman, fantastic album, really good stuff. Chris Squire was definitely the brains behind Yes, and I'm hoping that Billy Sherwood will do well in his place.
I think with a member like Chris Squire, he's irreplaceable. His bass sound is iconic. It's super unique.
Yeah.
I don't think they could replace him in the band. I don't think they should keep going. His sound was always it. I was the only continuous thing in the band was that solid foundation. The bass was always there. And I think his albums have impacted me in a great way. Three of them especially, which have been Close to the Edge, Tales from Topographic Oceans, and Relayer.
Yeah.
Have been my three favorite that they've done. The three most progressive, of course.
Oh man.
But yeah,
I'm gonna
very influential to my sound and my styling. And I saw him playing bass on the I think it was one of the Yes Songs DVD videos or whatever. And I said, wow, I kind of want to play bass a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I want to just get a Rickenbacker and mess around a little bit and pretend to be Chris Squire.
Yeah.
Even though I'm a guitar player. Because he's just so present.
Yeah.
Josh?
He is the sound of that band.
He was, and we will greatly miss him. So, yeah. Anyone else wanted to say before we finish up?
Josh?
Honestly, I'm admittedly not too familiar with Yes's work. Obviously, I know their hits. And as far as Chris Squire goes, he definitely was the best part of the band, in my opinion, him or the keyboardist. But the first time I'll say this much, the first time I heard Roundabout, all I could say to myself was, this is what bass in music needs to be.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, yeah.
Roundabout is just, whew,
that and Getty.
Unbelievable. Yeah, and Getty, of course. Yeah,
Getty, who was Getty influenced by?
Chris Squire.
Oh, there you go.
I mean, I saw them. I didn't see them personally. I wish I had, but they were going to do they were doing the Yes tour with Geddy Lee as the bassist, and I was just thinking, holy shit, that is incredible. Geddy Lee and Rick Wakeman. Geddy Lee and Rick Wakeman with Yes. That would have been incredible.
Right. I also say this, going along with what Josh said, how bass should sound in music, specifically progressive music. Chris was the guy, in my opinion, out of anybody in that era. Of course, then you have Getty and was it Greg Lake? That was a bassist too, but he wasn't that great.
Yep.
Greg Lake was okay.
Put bass. Yeah, Chris put basses on a map.
You kind of gave him a face, you know?
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, before bass, if you really want to hear bass in any kind of music that's really more, probably be like the more obscure jazz, bluegrass, blues, that kind of stuff. And people really didn't care about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Only if you were like some farmer guy, musician guy somewhere in like Missouri where Pat Metheny grew up, they would care from all the groovy stuff.
Yeah, of course.
But Chris, that's what he did for bass players. I think if you're a bass player, if you don't know who Chris Squire is, you're doing yourself a great disservice. I don't care what you play.
Yeah.
I agree.
A bass player should know who Chris Squire is. Together, for me, is as important as Jaco Pastorius is, musically speaking, for bass players around the world.
Totally agree.
And I mean, he's one of the guys that made Joe Young pick up the freaking bass hook. Like you said, and Geddy Lee. And the man, another thing about the man, he did not stay behind his other band members. No way whatsoever. Whatever groove they were playing, my man would come up with some crazy lines.
And he wouldn't be a bass player. He would do counterpoint to the keyboard. Like if we listen to Siberian True, he would do counterpoint to the keyboard. He wouldn't just be the bass player playing the root note, all day long.
Yeah,
he had intricate, unique parts.
Especially on Siberian True. Holy crap!
So
you can hear him. You can hear him pairing with you hear Chris Squire matching what Steve Howe was doing on the bass. I mean, it was ridiculous. Siberian True was some of his best bass work, and I can safely say that I'm hoping that Billy Sherwood does well in his place. I've seen some of the stuff that Billy Sherwood is able to do, and he's an incredible bass player himself. I think that's a pretty good place to end off.
All right. Yeah.
All right.
Good.
Hopefully.
Good.
By the way, Josh, tell your dad if he ever wants to give us a shout out and maybe in the future.
Oh, definitely. I think he would really enjoy talking with you guys, because especially with you, Bryan, because all this stuff is right up his alley. I mean, he's incredibly knowledgeable on Yes, ELP, Jethro Tull. He loves Jethro Tull. So obviously this would be great for him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was drumming ELP back in the day. I had a talk with him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And my dad's a great example of somebody who grew up in that era playing that kind of stuff, but when I came up and started playing guitar, he was able to pick up the style pretty quickly. It was difficult for him, don't get me wrong, but he loves, the drummer for BT Bam and that kind of like aggressive, progressive style. He's into it, and he did pretty good at learning it. But he's a huge Mike Portnoy hater, so I'll leave it at that.
A Mike Portnoy hater?
Oh, he just calls him Little Neil Peart or something like that. I don't know.
No,
fair enough.
Oh boy.
No,
he's not wrong.
All right.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for tuning in. We hope that you guys enjoyed it. What did you guys think? Any final notes?
That was a lot of
fun. That was good. Good talk. Yeah.
Great talk. Great talk.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
No problem. No problem, Josh. You're welcome back anytime. So this has been a great episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. And as always, we will see you on the next episode of Talking Prog. Please like, share, and subscribe. All right, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.